Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. So today I want to actually talk about Afghanistan and the current situation in Afghanistan with regard to forced migration. So we've covered Afghanistan on this channel before, but we've covered a lot of the information on the channel with regard to what has happened before the Taliban takeover. And I think it's important now to do an update on what we know about the current migration and particularly forced migration situation in the country. Now, of course, the situation is evolving quickly. I have looked in the past at the history of migration also in the country. If you're interested in that, you can also check it out here. I'll make sure to link it in the description below also. So previously on the channel, I have covered also how particularly Western governments were evacuating Afghans after the fall of the government and when the Taliban took over. But I do think it's time to do an update here. And of course, things are always changing very rapidly. This is the information that we know as of the end of November 2021. So I want to talk a little bit about what we know with regard to, refugee flows. What are we seeing, especially in the region, and how did the Taliban takeover also affect this? I'll also talk about, the current really problematic economic situation in the country, and how neighboring countries in the region are dealing with this, as well as some governments further afield. Now, of course, if you have more information, if you're on the ground in the country, if you're working there, or if you're someone living there, please feel free to also add additional information that could be really helpful to viewers. One thing that we have seen is that refugee flows have actually been lower than we expected them to be. And here I mean cross-border flows. And this could also be for a number of reasons, particularly the recorded number of new arrivals. So UNHCR, or the UN Refugee Agency, has recorded almost 70,000 newly arriving Afghans who probably need protection in neighboring countries since the start of the year. And the majority of this is since August, or since the Taliban took over. We're also seeing that the composition of these people are, mainly women and children, with around 75% of this population being made up of women and children that are at least, that have been registered, that we know about, particularly in Iran, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. Now, we do know that numbers are quite a bit higher than that. At least informally, we know that, particularly in the case of Iran, because the Iranian government has also, and NGOs on the ground have come out with different numbers, because many of the people that are arriving are not registered. So besides what we know about, international displacement, we do know that there's been really a lot of internal displacement in the country. So it's estimated that around 3.4 million people are currently internally displaced in the country as of November 15th, 2021. And we know that close to 700,000 people have been internally displaced because of conflict this year. And again, a good portion of that has happened in the second half of this year, or, since the Taliban takeover. Now, we know that there's likely to be quite a bit more displacement in the coming months, but a lot of that is going to have to do with probably more humanitarian issues, with winter setting in, with the total kind of collapse of the economy in the country, with issues of acute malnutrition, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The majority of people who have reported leaving Afghanistan have done so for security-related reasons, and there are a lot of basic needs that are needed by the people who have arrived in Iran and Pakistan, which includes access to shelter, livelihoods, food, documentation, and particularly those that are undocumented in Iran are also very concerned about detention and forced return. So Afghanistan's land borders with Pakistan and Iran have remained largely closed, except for people who have passports and visas for those countries, which is something that is not very easy to get. So we do know that a large portion of those who are crossing, especially in Iran, are those without documentation. And we know that deportations have also been happening from Iran, from Tajikistan, and from Pakistan, all in the last few months, which is, of course, really problematic, particularly if we look at the issue of non-refoulement, which means that people should not be returned to places where their safety is in danger, which we know is the case for many people in Afghanistan. So deportations here are highly problematic. They're seen negatively by the international community, particularly UNHCR has, put out recommendations that countries should not be deporting Afghans at this time. If we zoom in on Iran, what we can also see there is that, it's estimated that, up to 300,000 Afghans have actually entered Iran since the takeover of the Taliban. And there is expected to be possibly more people that arrive. The figures that we're hearing coming out of Iran are that between 4,000 and 5,000 Afghans are fleeing into Iran each day via informal border crossings. And those are according to more locally reported figures. Of course, since the beginning of the year, UNHCR has identified around 23,000 Afghans who are newly arrived in Iran. And we can see that there was a real jump in the numbers in August, September, and then those have trickled off in October and November. That's with the officially recorded numbers. Now, we also know that there are incredible funding needs with regard to humanitarian assistance for Afghans. So the United Nations Refugee Agency has said that, around $300 million is really needed to help the people who are fleeing. But only around a third of this has been funded so far. So we know that there's really a funding shortfall to deal with the humanitarian needs in the countries bordering Afghanistan at the moment. So currently in Iran, according to UNHCR, there are around 4 million potential persons of concern. There are around 2.6 million undocumented Afghans in the country currently, and around close to 800,000, so 780,000 who are card holders that are documented in Iran right now that are Afghans. But we know there's a huge amount of irregularity. There are, really problematic issues of deportation in the country, and as well as, just rights issues for Afghans in the country. So Iran and Pakistan are the countries that we know that host the largest numbers of Afghans today. So if we also look at the situation in Pakistan, we can see that around 50,000 people have been registered as arriving this year in Pakistan. Again, that's probably a gross underestimation of the real situation in the country. But Pakistan has set up a border fence that has also heavily restricted the movement of refugees, of asylum seekers to the country. So we know it's become more and more difficult for Afghans to actually cross the border. And again, Pakistan is also only allowing in Afghans that have passports and visas for the country. So if we can see here also, at least for those who have been recorded, again, there was a spike in August and September and then tapering off. We can see here the main areas of Afghanistan where people have been coming from that are documented. So Kabul, Nangarhar, really, the main feeders of people coming. We can see this, where they're currently residing in Pakistan. We can also see the main reasons that they have left, major concerns that are raised now with them in Pakistan with regard to, for instance, access to shelter, livelihoods, access to food, medical assistance, and more. We know that the international community has been raising a red flag about the issues in Afghanistan with regard to the economy, with regard to banking. There's a huge liquidity crisis, and UNDP, amongst others, have warned that the financial system could collapse within months. So we know that it is really just limping along, and then this is going to create even more problems within the country. So on November 17th, the World Food Program stated that 22.8 million Afghans, so half of the population, will face acute food insecurity from November on, including, probably 8.1 million at risk for famine-like conditions. And this is the highest number of acutely food insecure people ever recorded in Afghanistan, and it's among the highest levels of acute food insecurity worldwide. So WFP, or the World Food Program, has also reported that the situation for children is increasingly alarming, with half of all children under 5, or 3.2 million children, expected to suffer from acute malnutrition. So, really, we're talking about a situation in Afghanistan on the brink of absolute catastrophe from a humanitarian perspective, just for the people within Afghanistan. So, what does that mean for future possible flows of displacement, of refugees? So we can definitely probably expect more internally displaced people. We can probably expect more displacement across the borders, but as mentioned previously, it's harder and harder for people actually to make that movement across borders, with border closures, with a border fence, but also with the fact that nowadays people often need smugglers to get them across borders, and that costs money. There's serious liquidity constraints in general within the country. So what we're also seeing more and more is really what we would call involuntary immobility. So people that would like to get out of the country that are just unable to for a number of reasons. With recent research that was also done in the Horizon 2020 MIGNEX project, and there's actually a brief that has come out about that with regard to business owners and entrepreneurs in the country. I'll make sure to also link that information in the description below if you'd like to read up more on that. We're seeing really a lot of involuntary immobility there. So there are, major supply chain issues, there are major financing issues where, business owners and factory owners are just like, they can no longer continue to function in the country the way it is now. Many of them would like to move, many of them would like to move their operations, but that just is not possible. For many of them also, their physical capital, their monetary capital is tied up in physical capital that they cannot easily move, and they don't have the liquidity, they don't have the cash often to get out of the country. So what we're seeing more and more is really a lot of involuntary immobility in the country. So within the region, we see very little support for hosting new refugees, unfortunately. Official borders are closed to those without valid documents, without visas. They just cannot enter. We're seeing, regular deportations from countries in the region, sending Afghans back to Afghanistan, again, which is highly problematic. And, beyond the region, we're also not seeing, huge willingness from the international community, from Western governments to host more Afghans. So many countries have made pledges, particularly with regard to Afghans that have helped their governments over time, the US or the UK or Australia or others. But these are still generally small numbers of people. As an example, the UK intends to resettle around 5,000 Afghan nationals at risk in 2020, and has said that they will that they'll resettle up to 20,000 in the longer term. Here, priority is also given to women and girls and religious and other minorities. But again, these are quite small numbers compared to the actual needs in the country. We do know that some evacuations have started up again in the country. So just recently, Germany was able to fly out more than 300 people from Afghanistan, with the help of the Qatari government. So we are seeing some positive movements there, but we definitely know that, it's much less than is currently needed in the country. So again, I hope this has helped just give a quick update on the current situation in Afghanistan with regard to forced migration and mobility in the country. Again, if you have more information on what's going on the ground in the country, please do add your own comments there. We want as much information here that can be as helpful as possible. So as usual, if this video was helpful for you, please like it, subscribe to the channel, make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos that I upload every week on different migration issues. If there are certain issues that you would like to see covered on the channel also, please do make sure to send us a comment, and we will also try to honor those requests as much as possible. I definitely hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.